The smoke-filled cantina on Nexus Station buzzed with conversations in a dozen alien languages. Neon lights flickered overhead, casting strange shadows across the faces of creatures from every corner of the galaxy. The air was thick with the smell of exotic spices and the electric hum of translation devices working overtime. Vexstar, a towering Courtney warrior, with battle scars etched across his chitinous hide, sat hunched over his drink in the darkest corner of the establishment. His 4 muscular arms trembled slightly as he stared into the amber liquid, lost in memories that refused to fade. The veteran warrior's usual commanding presence seemed diminished, replaced by something his companions had never seen before. Fear. Come on, Vexstar, growled Quinn, a reptilian, sordid mercenary whose scales glistened green under the cantina's harsh lighting, his yellow eyes fixed on the troubled warrior as he leaned back in his reinforced chair. We've all shared our war stories tonight. What's got you so quiet? You're usually the first to boast about your victories. The other aliens at the crowded table leaned in with obvious curiosity. There was Crystal X, a prism trader whose translucent body caught and refracted the cantina's lights into brilliant rainbows. Her species was known for their calculating nature and vast trading networks that spanned half the galaxy. Beside her sat 2 insectoid hive soldiers, their compound eyes clicking as they focused on Vexstar. Their species shared a collective consciousness, making them nearly unbeatable in coordinated warfare. At the far end of the table, contained within a specialized pressure suit, was Vortex, a gaseous nebula entity whose swirling form pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. His species existed in the vacuum of space itself, making them natural pilots and navigators for the galaxy's most dangerous missions. They had all heard whispers about Vexstar's encounters with the mysterious species, called humans during what the galactic community now referred to as the Terran Expansion Wars. Rumors spread through every spaceport and trading post about the strange, bipedal creatures who had emerged from a small blue planet on the galaxy's outer rim. The Corthoni, don't tell ghost stories, clicked one of the hive soldiers, his mandibles creating a sound like breaking glass. What could possibly shake a warrior who's conquered 17 star systems? Vexstar's scarred head lifted slowly, his compound eyes reflecting the cantina's lights like black mirrors. His mandibles clicked nervously, a habit his species developed. When facing the unknown, the sound was barely audible over the cantina's background noise, but it carried the weight of genuine fear. You want to know about humans? His voice carried a tremor that surprised everyone at the table. The mighty Corthini warrior, who had faced down plasma cannons and energy blades without flinching, about a shell-shocked recruit, about what they're capable of when their backs are against the wall. The cantina seemed to grow quieter around their table, as if other patrons sensed the gravity of what was about to be shared. Even the automated serving drones moved more silently, their sensors picking up the change in atmospheric tension. Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you. Vexstar reached for his drink with one of his forearms, the liquid sloshing as his hand shook. And don't expect me to sleep well tonight after dragging these memories back to the surface. He took a long drink, the alcohol burning down his throat as he gathered the courage to speak. It was supposed to be a simple extermination mission. Standard planetary cleansing operation. The humans had established a mining colony on Kepler 4-4 to see. Right in the middle of territory we had claimed for expansion. Crystal X's form shimmered with interest. A mining colony? Hardly seems worth the effort of a full military campaign. That's what High Command thought, Vexstar continued, his voice growing steadier as he fell into the familiar rhythm of a military briefing. Just 2,000 civilians scattered across a handful of settlements. Maybe 300 hastily trained militia with outdated weapons. The kind of operation we could handle in our sleep. The warrior's eyes grew distant as he remembered the briefing room aboard the Corthane flagship. We brought 10,000 of our finest warriors, battle-hardened veterans who had crushed resistance on dozens of worlds. Our ships blocked out the sun when we entered their system. Our weapons could have turned their entire planet into molten glass from orbit. The prism trader's crystalline form shimmered with amusement, her voice carrying the musical tones of her species. 10,000. Against 300. That does sound like overkill, even for Corthany standards. Vexstar's mandibles spread in what might have been a smile, but there was no humor in it. Only the bitter knowledge of hard-earned experience. That's exactly what we thought too. That's what every single one of us believed as we prepared our weapons and said our prayers to the war gods. He set down his empty glass with a sharp click against the metal table. We had no idea we were about to learn the most terrifying lesson in galactic warfare. We thought we understood what it meant to fight for survival. We thought we knew what desperate creatures were capable of when faced with extinction. The veteran warrior looked around the table at each of his companions, his scarred face grave with the weight of memory. We were wrong about everything. The human colony was built around a mining facility, Vexstar continued, his voice growing steadier. As he fell into the rhythm of storytelling, the amber liquid in his glass caught the flickering neon lights as he gestured with one of his forearms. Standard prefab structures scattered across the valley floor. Minimal defenses, just a few automated turrets and energy barriers that wouldn't stop a determined child. He paused, his compound eyes reflecting the memories like dark mirrors. Our orbital scans showed nothing that could threaten a Corthana strike force. The largest structure was their mining headquarters, maybe 4 stories tall. Their power grid was basic. Their communications array was outdated by 50 years, and their weapon signatures barely registered on our sensors. The cantina had grown quiet around them, other patrons a mix of traders, smugglers, and mercenaries. From across the galaxy, straining to listen to the legendary warrior's tale, even the automated serving drones seemed to move more quietly, their mechanical whispers barely audible. The first wave went in at dawn. I led the assault myself, commanding 3 full battalions of our best shock troops. Vexstar's scarred face hardened with the memory. We dropped from orbit in assault pods, expecting to punch through their defenses like paper. The plan was simple: establish a beachhead, neutralize their command structure, and have the civilians rounded up before their sun reached its peak. His mandibles clicked slowly, a sound like distant gunfire. We expected to be done by midday, sipping victory drinks and preparing casualty reports that would barely fill a single data pad. But the humans, they fought like nothing we'd ever encountered in 3 centuries of conquest. Crystalex leaned forward, her translucent form shimmering with curiosity. Surely primitive colonists couldn't match trained Corthoni warriors. Your species has conquered half the spiral arm. That's what made it so terrifying, Vexstar replied, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. They shouldn't have been able to stop us. Every military doctrine, every tactical analysis, every strategic model said it was impossible. But humans don't seem to care much about what's supposed to be impossible. He took another drink, gathering his thoughts. Their commander was a woman named Anna, just a mining engineer who'd probably never held a weapon before our ships appeared in their sky. But she coordinated their defense like a veteran general who'd studied warfare for decades. When our first pods landed, she was already 3 steps ahead of us. 2 hive soldiers exchanged rapid clicks of amazement. Their collective consciousness made coordinated defense second nature. But for individual creatures to achieve such unity was remarkable. They had turned every building into a fortress, every tunnel into a trap, every piece of mining equipment into a weapon of war. Vexstar's voice grew stronger as he remembered the details. Their ore processing plant became a sniper's nest with overlapping fields of fire. Their residential blocks were rigged with explosives that could bring down entire sections when we tried to advance through them. He gestured with 2 arms, mapping out the battlefield on the cantina table. When we breached their outer perimeter, expecting them to fall back to secondary positions, the humans didn't retreat. They counterattacked, not with military precision, but with something far more dangerous: desperation mixed with creativity. Vortex's gaseous form pulsed with interest, his translator crackling to life. Desperation makes creatures predictable. They should have been easy to contain. It's not human desperation, Vexstar said grimly. A boy named Jin couldn't have been more than 16 standard years old, jury-rigged mining charges into anti-personnel weapons, inhelded metal fragments, 2 industrial explosives, and turned their mining tunnels into a killing maze. The warrior's scarred hands clenched into fists as he remembered. This kid held an entire choke point for 3 hours against wave after wave of my best soldiers. He used the mining equipment like he'd been born to it. Conveyor belts became moving cover, or crushers became improvised artillery. And he turned their ventilation system into a distribution network for smoke grenades. Quinn's reptilian features showed grudging respect, resourceful for a youngling. But one defender against a battalion? That's just it. He wasn't alone. Every human in that colony fought like their life meant something beyond just surviving another day. Vexter's voice carried genuine awe mixed with horror. When we finally brought Jin down with a plasma strike that should have vaporized him, instantly he triggered one last explosive that brought down half the tunnel system. 20 of my best soldiers were buried alive in that collapse. The cantina fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant thrum of the station's massive engines. Other patrons had stopped their own conversations to listen, drawn by the raw emotion in the veteran warrior's voice. But surely superior numbers and firepower eventually won out? The sordid mercenary pressed, leaning forward with his yellow eyes fixed on Vextar. Numbers meant nothing to them, Vextar interrupted, his voice cracking with remembered disbelief. An elderly human named Kyung, maybe 70 standard years old, turned herself into a living bomb. She walked straight into our forward command, post wearing a vest packed with mining explosives and proximity sensors. His mandibles clicked rapidly with agitation. But here's the part that still haunts my dreams, she was singing. Some kind of human lullaby, soft and gentle as she walked. Through our defensive fire, her voice was the last thing my tactical officers heard before the explosion. Turned our command structure into twisted metal and superheated plasma. The warrior's voice dropped to barely a whisper. By the end of that first day, we had lost 7,000 soldiers. 7,000 of the galaxy's finest warriors, defeated by farmers and miners who refused to die quietly. The battlefield was littered with our dead, while human voices still echoed from the tunnels, singing their strange songs of defiance. Vextar looked around the table at his stunned companions, his eyes reflecting the weight of impossible defeat. And that was just the beginning. Vextar ordered another drink before continuing, his forearms moving with practiced efficiency as he signaled the automated serving drone. The machine glided over silently, dispensing the amber liquid into his reinforced glass. The warrior's hands still trembled slightly as he wrapped his scarred fingers around the container. The survivors regrouped at our secondary landing zone, dragging our wounded and trying to make sense of what had just happened. His voice carried the weight of command decisions that had gone horribly wrong. I sent emergency transmissions to the fleet, requesting immediate reinforcements and medical support. 7,000 casualties in a single day against a mining colony. It was unthinkable. The cantina's atmosphere seemed to grow heavier as other patrons leaned in to catch every word. A group of Zenith traders at a nearby table had abandoned their holographic deal negotiations to listen, their elongated heads turning toward Vextar's voice. Command couldn't believe our losses, he continued, taking a long drink to steady his nerves. Admiral Krextel himself descended from the flagship to investigate. He brought with him the entire Psychological Warfare Division, specialists, trained to break the minds of enemy combatants before the first shot was fired. Crystal X's form shimmered with interest, her musical voice cutting through the ambient noise. Your species has conquered dozens of worlds using mental manipulation techniques. Surely these primitive humans would be vulnerable to such methods. Vextar laughed bitterly, the sound echoing strangely through his alien vocal cords. They were right, in a way. The humans did have some kind of mental manipulation technology at work. But it wasn't technology in any sense we understood. It was something far more terrifying and far more effective. He paused, gathering his thoughts as memories flooded back. The humans had weaponized their own emotions. It's not as a weapon against us, but as armor for themselves. They had turned their capacity for feeling into the most devastating military asset I've ever encountered. Vortex's gaseous form pulsed with confusion, his translator crackling to life. Explain. How to biological. Emotions constitute a tactical advantage. Their medic, a woman named Yoon, would broadcast healing frequencies across all communication channels while she worked on the wounded. Star's mandibles clicked as he remembered the scene. But she wasn't just treating physical injuries. She was talking to her patients, telling them about their families back on Earth, their dreams for the future, their reasons to keep fighting. The warrior's eyes grew distant as he recalled the intercepted transmissions. Every injured human became a living propaganda broadcast. When Yoon worked on a wounded miner named Dong, she would talk about his daughter's first steps, how he was saving money to bring his family to the colony. When she treated a young woman named Yoon, who'd lost her arm in the fighting, she spoke about the gardens Yoon planned to grow when the war was over. One of the hive soldiers clicked rapidly, the sound like chattering insects. Emotional manipulation is a known psychological warfare technique. We employ similar methods in our campaigns. No, you don't understand, Vexstar said urgently, leaning forward across the metal table. This wasn't manipulation. It was genuine. Every word Yoon spoke was true. Every emotion was real. The humans weren't trying to trick themselves into fighting. They were reminding themselves why the fight mattered. He gestured with two arms, painting pictures in the smoky air. Then there was Tae, their communications officer, a brilliant human who'd studied our technology and learned to hack into our tactical networks within hours of our first assault. He started playing recordings throughout our command structure. Quinn's reptilian features showed interest. Intelligence gathering? Disinformation campaigns? Children singing, Vexstar whispered, his voice barely audible above the cantina's background noise. Just children singing simple songs about hope and love and dreams of tomorrow. Lullabies that human mothers sang to help their young ones sleep peacefully. The effect on his audience was immediate. Several aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their own experiences with offspring making the concept resonate despite their different biologies. Half my soldiers couldn't function after hearing those voices, Vexstar continued, his mandibles clicking rapidly with remembered distress. These weren't trained warriors listening to enemy propaganda. These were the children those humans were, fighting to protect. Innocent voices singing about flowers and sunshine, and the games they wanted to play when the scary monsters went away. The Prism Trader's crystalline form dulled with confusion, her usual calculating demeanor shaken. How does that constitute warfare? Music has no tactical value on a battlefield. Vexstar's scarred face turned toward her, his compound eyes reflecting the cantina's harsh lighting, because it reminded us what we were fighting for: territory expansion, resource acquisition, orders from distant commanders who would never set foot on that planet. Glory for the Empire and advancement through the military ranks. He took another drink, the liquid burning down his throat. But the humans, they were fighting for those singing children. For old women like Kyun who baked fresh bread every morning and shared it with anyone who was hungry. For boys like Jin who had never seen the blue skies of Earth but called that mining colony home anyway because it was where his friends lived. The warrior's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of their section of the cantina. When you're fighting someone who has something to lose, you maintain a tactical advantage. You can predict their behavior, exploit their weaknesses, force them into positions where they must choose between their objectives and their survival. He looked around the table at each of his companions, his expression grave with hard-earned wisdom. But when you're fighting someone who has everything to lose, when their entire universe consists of the people and places they're defending, you're not fighting soldiers anymore. You're fighting pure determination given physical form. And that's a battle you can never win through superior firepower alone. The cantina fell silent except for the distant hum of life support systems, each alien processing the implications of what they'd heard. Even the automated serving drones seemed to move more quietly, as if the machines themselves understood the gravity of the warrior's words. The siege lasted 8 months, Vexstar continued, his voice growing hoarse from the strain of reliving memories he'd tried to bury for years. The warrior's usual commanding presence had diminished to barely a whisper, forcing everyone at the table to lean closer. 8 months of what should have been a 3-day operation? He stared into his empty cup, watching the last drops of amber liquid cling to the glass walls like tears. We cut off their supply lines first, standard siege warfare. Our orbital blockade prevented any ships from reaching the planet, and our ground forces controlled every major transportation route. No food shipments, no medical supplies, no reinforcements from other human colonies. The cantina's automated systems dimmed the lighting slightly as the station's night cycle began, casting longer shadows across the assembled aliens. Other patrons had given up any pretense of their own conversations, creating an amphitheater of listeners around Vexstar's table, and we destroyed their communications array with precision plasma strikes, he continued, his mandibles clicking with remembered tactical pride. No way to call for help, no way to coordinate with the outside galaxy. We bombed their food production facilities, their hydroponics gardens, their protein synthesis plants, everything that kept them alive. Quinn's yellow eyes gleamed in the dim light. Textbook siege tactics. Force them to choose between slow starvation and quick surrender. Any rational species would have surrendered within weeks, Vexstar agreed, his voice carrying bitter irony. The Zephyrians lasted 12 days when we used the same strategy on their mining worlds. The Crystalline Confederacy sent surrender signals after just 6 days of blockade. He paused, remembering the intercepted transmissions from those early days. But the humans? They adapted. They began eating anything organic they could find, tree bark, grass roots, even processing algae. From their water recycling systems, they turned their waste into fertilizer and grew mushrooms in the darkness of their sewer tunnels. Crystal X's form shimmered with disgust, consuming waste products. That's barbaric even by primitive standards. That wasn't the worst part, Vexstar said quietly, his scarred hands beginning to tremble again. They turned their dead into fertilizer for underground gardens. When a human fell in battle, their companions would hold a brief ceremony, say words about honor and sacrifice, then carefully compost the body to grow food for the living. The cantina fell silent except for the steady hum of life support systems and the distant thrum of the station's massive engines. Even the serving drones had stopped their quiet mechanical whispers, as if the machines themselves were listening. But still they sang, Vexstar whispered, his voice barely carrying across the metal table. Every night, when the fighting stopped, and both sides counted their dead, the entire colony would sing together. Men, women, children, their voices rising from the tunnels like ghosts calling out to the stars. One of the hive soldiers clicked rapidly, the sound like nervous chattering. Psychological warfare against your own forces. Clever. No, you don't understand, Vexstar said urgently. They weren't singing to hurt us. They were singing to keep themselves human. Even when we had them completely surrounded, even when their children were starving and their wounded were dying without medical supplies, they would sing. His compound eyes reflected the cantina's flickering lights like dark mirrors full of terrible memories. Their voices echoed through the mining tunnels, through our electronic monitoring equipment, through our dreams when we tried to sleep. Songs about home, about love, about the beauty they'd seen in their short lives. Vortex's gaseous form pulsed with confusion, his translator crackling to life. How did auditory expression become a military asset? A mechanic named Day showed us exactly how, Vexstar replied, his voice growing stronger as he remembered specific details. This human had worked on mining equipment his entire adult life. But when we started our orbital bombardment campaign, he converted their industrial haulers into makeshift defense platforms. The warrior gestured with 2 arms, mapping out the battle in 3-dimensional space above the table. Day jury-rigged plasma cutters into anti-ship weapons, mounted them on ore haulers that could barely maintain orbit, and created a defensive network that actually damaged 2 of our cruisers. Quinn leaned forward with professional interest. Improvised weapons can be effective, but against military-grade shielding. When we tried to break through his defenses with concentrated firepower, Day piloted a converted hauler on a direct collision course with our flagship. Vexstar continued, his mandibles clicking rapidly. A suicide run in a civilian transport, against a battle cruiser that outmassed his ship by a factor of 10,000. The veteran warrior's voice cracked with remembered awe. He was singing when he died. Some human song about flying home to his family. His voice was broadcasting on all frequencies right up until the moment of impact. The explosion damaged our primary weapons array and forced us to retreat to a higher orbit. He took a shuddering breath before continuing. The teacher, Sue, gathered all the children in the school's basement, when the surface fighting became too dangerous. We thought they were hiding, waiting for us to rescue them from the insanity their parents had created. The warrior's scarred face showed genuine amazement mixed with horror. When we finally breached their defenses and found the school, she had taught those children to operate the colony's entire computer system. 12-year-old kids were running power grids, managing water recycling systems, coordinating supply, drops to the fighting positions. Crystal X's form dulled with incomprehension. Children operating military infrastructure that violates every civilized convention of warfare. They weren't soldiers, Vexstar said, looking up at his audience with haunted eyes that had seen too much. They were just kids who loved their families enough to learn how to keep them alive. Sue had turned that basement into a command center, run by children who should have been playing games and learning about art and music. He gestured around the table, encompassing all the different species present. We weren't fighting soldiers anymore. We were fighting an entire species that had decided to become something more than what they were born to be. Every human civilian had become a warrior. Every warrior had become a force of nature. And every child had become a guardian of their people's future. The cantina remained silent. Each alien processing the implications of what they'd heard about human adaptability and determination in the face of impossible odds. Vexstar straightened in his chair, his warrior's bearing returning as he approached the end of his tale. The scarred veteran's forearms moved with practiced precision as he adjusted his position. Muscle memory from decades of military service taking over even in the smoky confines of the cantina. When we finally took the colony, only 43 humans were left alive, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute finality. 43 survivors out of 2,000 original colonists. Men, women, and children who had somehow endured 8 months of siege warfare that should have broken any civilized species within weeks. The other aliens around the table exchanged meaningful glances, their various forms of communication, clicking mandibles, shifting crystalline patterns, pulsing bioluminescence, creating a symphony of alien disbelief. The hive soldiers' antennae twitched with visible agitation, their collective consciousness struggling to process the tactical implications of what they were hearing. But here's the number that Command doesn't like to talk about in official reports. Vexstar continued, his compound eyes reflecting the cantina's harsh lighting like black mirrors. Out of 50,000 Korthani warriors sent to that system, 50,000 of the galaxy's most elite soldiers, fewer than 8,000 survived to return home. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the space station's massive life support systems. Other patrons in the cantina had completely abandoned their own conversations, creating an impromptu audience of dozens of alien species all focused on the veteran warrior's words. The humans had turned what Command planned as a simple 3DA extermination mission into the greatest military disaster in our species' history, he said, his mandibles spreading in what might have been respect, fear, or perhaps both emotions tangled together. 42,000 of our finest warriors dead or missing. Our fleet crippled, our reputation shattered across half the galaxy. Crystal X's form shimmered with calculations, her trader's mind automatically processing the economic implications. The cost and resources alone must have been staggering. Ships, equipment, trained personnel. Credits and resources can be replaced, Vexstar interrupted, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But that's not why I still wake up screaming in the middle of sleep cycles. That's not why I see human faces in every shadow, hear human voices in every mechanical sound. He paused, letting the weight of memory settle over him like a heavy cloak. The cantina's atmospheric processors cycled audibly, drawing away the accumulated smoke and replacing it with filtered air that carried the metallic taste of recycled atmosphere. It's because of what Hannah told me before she died, he continued, his scarred hands beginning to tremble again. The human commander who had held her people together through 8 months of hell, who had turned farmers and miners into warriors, capable of defeating trained soldiers. Vortex's gaseous form pulsed with curiosity, his translator crackling to life. The final words of defeated enemies often carry little tactical significance. She was lying in the rubble of their command center, Vexstar said, his voice taking on an almost reverent tone. bleeding from a dozen plasma wounds, her left arm completely severed, burns covering half her face. Any other species would have been screaming in agony or begging for mercy. The warrior's mandibles clicked slowly as he remembered the scene. I approached her to offer the traditional surrender terms: quick death for the leadership, slavery for the survivors. Is standard Korthany protocol for defeated enemies. But she looked up at me with those strange human eyes, so small compared to ours, but somehow containing more depth than our compound vision could process. He took a shuddering breath before continuing. She said, "We forgive you. We know you're just following orders from commanders who will never understand what they've unleashed here. But if you ever threaten another human world, we'll show you what we're really capable of." Quinn snorted derisively, his reptilian features twisting with disdain. Empty threats from a dying enemy. Typical psychological warfare attempt to salvage. "Something from defeat," No Vexstar whispered, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "That's exactly what makes humans so terrifying." She wasn't making threats. She was making a promise. And she wasn't speaking from hatred or revenge. She was speaking from love. The veteran warrior stood slowly, his battle-scarred frame unfolding to its full imposing height. Humans don't fight because they hate their enemies. They fight because they love each other too much to let anything destroy what they've built together. Every human who died in that colony was fighting not to kill us, but to protect something precious. He reached into his utility pouch and placed several credit chips on the metal table, payment for his drinks, and a generous tip for the serving drone. The Korthany Empire sued for peace 3 months after the colony fell. Not because we couldn't defeat humanity militarily. Our fleet still outnumbered theirs. Our technology was still superior. Vexstar paused at the edge of their table, looking back at his stunned audience. We sued for peace because we realized that fighting humans would fundamentally change who we were as a species. We would have to become something monstrous to match their determination, something that would destroy the very civilization we were trying to protect. As he walked toward the cantina's exit, his heavy footsteps echoing on the metal deck plating, Vexstar called back to his audience one final time. Humans aren't spreading across the galaxy as conquerors seeking territory or resources. They're spreading as something far more dangerous, as beings who will never stop fighting for what they believe in, and who have the terrifying power to make anyone who opposes them question the very nature of their own soul. The massive warrior disappeared through the cantina's sliding doors, leaving behind a silence that seemed to stretch across the entire space station. Each alien species represented at the table was lost in their own thoughts about humanity. Some calculating how to profit from this knowledge, others wondering how to avoid ever facing humans in combat. And all of them fundamentally changed by what they had learned about the small blue planet's children and their capacity for both love and war. The cantina's automated systems continued their quiet operation, serving drinks and processing payments, but the atmosphere had shifted permanently. Word would spread through the station's communications networks, then to other stations, other worlds, other species across the galaxy. The legend of human resilience would grow with each telling, becoming both a warning and a promise that would echo through the stars for generations to come. The end.